Thanks for joining us. I'm Kent Justice, your host for This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition. The so-called DOGE efforts in the federal government have seen more than 75,000 employees accept a buyout offer, and 1,000 more apparently are going to be fired or lay off. And that puts an awful lot of people exiting government work, entering the private sector. My guests today have offered this thesis: federal employees, your plan B might be business ownership. So joining me at the table, Marshall Reddy and Kevin Monahan. Welcome. Thank you so much for this idea, this topic to discuss for us. Kevin's a specialist in small businesses and nonprofits. Marshall, a franchising expert, president of Franchise Network, Inc. since 1993. Kevin, get us started here. Obviously, even as we record this, middle of the week in March, we're seeing more of the pull and push of what's going on that government side. Let's not talk politics. Let's talk practical implications. There are workers who are going to go through transitions. They're probably going through them already.
Yes, and I think the three of us are going to wind up knowing somebody who's going to be affected by layoffs one way or another. And it's not all government. When we think of government, people automatically think, well, those fat cats are finally getting theirs. And they keep thinking of Washington, D.C. and the swamp and the drainage and all of that kind of thing. But the reality is, government is a big part of our lives, and it flows through everything from the federal sector to the state sector. Federal money goes to the states funnel money to the municipalities, and then, the biggest purchaser of goods and services from companies in the United States is the United States government. An amazing amount, trillions of dollars go through there and trickle down. And if contracts are lost, people are going to go. And of course, then there's the nonprofit sector, which do a lot of good in the public, but are funded from money that's from DC, that goes to the states, that goes to the municipalities, and then goes to the street. So that's a lot of people. And then we had the other bonus: 4 million kids are going to be graduating in May across the United States looking for work. So this is a big thing going on.
That's a great point, something that we haven't talked about probably enough in these last several months, is those graduates and whether they're going off to college or whether they're looking for, I need to work now. So as we get started here, let me make sure that everybody understands some of your expertise and perspective. Marshall, tell us more about what you do, and we'll definitely get into the notion of franchising and how that might be a plan B for some folks.
Well, Kent, thank you for having me. Kevin and I have worked together forever when he was with the SBDC. And so what I do, probably the best description, first of all, I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I grew up in a military family, all government workers, and entrepreneurialism was a word I'd never heard of. Got fired about 41 years ago after working myself through college. And that was a reality check, because that wasn't how it was supposed to be. And that kind of started me down a different path, which was a paradigm shift. And so I became an entrepreneur. I've had 3 companies. Sold my last one to a partner, and took a few months off. Thought, what do I want to do? What fits me? What would I match up well with? One thing I realized about my personality was I'm risk adverse. I'll take a calculated risk, but I don't want to take an unmitigated risk. And 30 plus years ago, everywhere I went, I saw franchises. And a friend of mine had an affiliation with a franchise down in South Florida. And next thing I know, I started looking at that and became a consultant. And 31 years later, that's what I do.
How about that?
Probably the best description I've come up with is I'm kind of like the eHarmony of franchising. I profile, I model, and I match people to franchise companies around the world.
All right. Yeah, so there's a lot in that. And I want to come back to this. Risk averse, but entrepreneur. I think my conception of an entrepreneur is, you got to be willing to take some risks. Kevin, tell us more about your background and where you're coming from.
Well, it's ironic. I come from an entrepreneurial family, but didn't do it for a long time. My parents owned a series of 5 restaurants and catering businesses, and I thought everybody was in the catering business until I grew up with other parents and friends and realized these people go to work every day and they come back at 6 o'clock, But I just had a vocational calling when I got out of school, which was business and political science. and my parents thought I'd never find a job anywhere, I wound up doing that. I kind of worked through the Department of Labor on a local level at the county in New Jersey where I came from. And from there, I became the head of economic development in the county and spent the rest of my career in economic development, which is going back to what he's talking about. Entrepreneurs take calculated risks. Entrepreneurship and economic development supports that. And so I've always seen myself as kind of a social worker for the potentially rich.
That's a good phrase.
And as time went on, I went from big boxes, trying to steal them from New York and bring them over to New Jersey, that kind of thing, to transitioning down to Jacksonville, where I worked for the University of Florida and of course, the University of North Florida, and work with smaller businesses, and that's been a great joy, and nonprofits as well. So it's been very rewarding. But I've been through a bunch of economic recoveries and layoffs and all those things, and this is nothing new. It's just how do we deal with it and how do we help people through it?
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about that this week because the stock market is taking a fall for consecutive days, Tuesday, Wednesday, and what have you. And that brings up this notion of, well, there's a lot of uncertainty because of what's happening with the Department of Government Efficiency and those efforts, seeing that the workforce is going, what's next? So let's hone in a little bit on this idea for folks who have been in the government workforce and now they're going to be looking for something else. Well, what's the message that you would have to them on making a transition or even considering it?
Well, I think the watchword that might trigger this is living with ambiguity. And that gets old after a while. People keep threatening your job. And there's no definite, maybe you're going to be here tomorrow, maybe you're not. After a while, you're going home every night and not knowing what to say to your family.
It's unsettling
so the key, right, exactly. So the key would be to have a game plan before something like that happens, or knowing that you have that if something happens, to relieve yourself of having to live in this ambiguity that keeps getting worse and worse and heavier and heavier. And one of those possibilities is starting your own business. It certainly has been the case in other recessionary environments we've been in, like 2008. And of course, the COVID time that we were there, a lot of businesses start up. A number shut down, but that's when a lot of new ones take its place. So just something for people to consider going forward.
Yeah, Marshall, is this something you're seeing as well for the folks that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin and I were chatting about this earlier. I keep waiting for that special time when the heavens open and a spear comes down and it tells you this is the perfect time to start your business.
Yeah. How likely is that?
It hasn't happened in 30 years, but I'm an optimist. But there's never a perfect time. But I mean, I've gone through 9/11, H1N1, SARS, 2008, COVID. COVID was the best 2 years my business has ever had. So it just really kind of goes to, are you half full or half empty as far as your personality? And there's no right or wrong. It's just who are you and how do you want to look at opportunities and at what time frame do you look at them?
So one of the things I mentioned earlier, tens of thousands of federal employees have already said, yeah, I'll accept this buyout. So there's a little bit of runway. Hey, I'm going to get paid, I think what I heard was till September or end of September or
8
what
months.
have you. Yeah, 8 months.
Yeah, that's right.
So that could give some people the bandwidth, not having to be at the office 8 to 5 or whatever, to be able to explore this. What are some of the first steps maybe on exploring?
Well, the first couple of steps is there are a large number of on the web websites that could let you take a test to decide whether you have the entrepreneurial qualities needed for either starting a business on your own. In other words, you develop all the processes yourself. It's got nothing to do with franchises. You're on your own.
Yeah.
You're starting from scratch. And there are some disadvantages to that, obviously, because you have to do everything, and that can get old after a while. And not everybody's cut out for that.
Yeah.
The second is buying a business that's already out there that's for sale. And of course, the big concern is, what are you buying? You might be buying something that's not quite as shiny as it looks like in the window, or you finally get in there and you realize that all the customers hate you because they hated that business, and you got a long way to get out of there. Yeah. And then the final one, of course, would be franchising, which has a lot of the processes that we mentioned before already packaged, and they're handed to you. They're telling you what to do, and if you follow what they do, you're probably going to do all right. But again, this is not for everybody. This is for a select number of people that are willing to take processes or develop processes and manage them well.
Yeah, Marshall, that's one of the things that I've always, in my mind, kind of thought, well, that's probably a good thing. If I'm going with a franchise, then yeah, some of those processes are already there. The pathway to success is in front of me. I need to follow the process. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think it's definitely accurate, but you got, on any given day, 4,000, 4,500 different franchise companies out there. And for some of those companies, if you have a pulse and some income, you're qualified. But the reality of it is that's not how you buy any business, much less a franchise, which is kind of what I have done for 3 decades. Is we're going to get to know you first of all. We're going to start with a profile, which is 15 pages on you. And then we're going to go through that profile, and then a secondary profile, and then we're going to build a business template or a business model. And assuming all of that still seems to make sense, then we will look at franchise companies that we've pre-screened, pre-qualified, and match the two of you together, then provide you with the tools to do your research so you don't skip steps.
Yeah, right.
I'm affiliated with a group called IFPG. We're the largest franchise consulting group in the world for the last 5 years. So we've got a big footprint to help people if they want to be helped. It's not right for everybody, though.
What's the cost of that?
I don't charge for my services at all. I come out of the marketing budget of that franchisor.
Okay.
So I'm a real estate broker, also a business broker, but my main business has been franchise consulting for three decades.
All right, so I just heard some reduced risk for somebody who wants to look into this, because I'm not, okay, I don't have to
You're not on the hook.
invest. Yeah, I don't have to invest money anyway. Obviously, there's an investment of time and thought and all of that to go through this process.
Yeah.
In terms of choosing a business, what do you recommend for people? Is it, hey, something I'm already passionate about? Is something I already got experience in? Am I looking for the best return on investment? How do I even decide where to go?
Well, it's a big canvas, as he alluded to before, with so many different kinds of franchises, and some better than others. But just business in general, frequently people decide that or explore looking at a business based on their life experience, either as a consumer or a hobby that they have, or something in the family that's going on. You tend to be exposed to that, and maybe you want to do that too, but you may not be right for it, and you got to be cautionary in that respect. The other thing that's going on is there is a Jacksonville in Northeast Florida, but Jacksonville in particular is always on the top 10 list of best places to start a small business in the United States. And why is that? It's not because we're just lucky. It's because there's a raft of programs that are available to assist people during and after getting into, let's say, franchising business or a business from their own, from scratch. So you have, in SBA, you have the Women's Business Center, you have SCORE, which is a volunteer organization, the Small Business Development Center, the Chamber of Commerce, the city itself, all big promoters of small business, and they all have classes and free help and are your biggest advocates.
Yeah. What's the impact for me as a business owner to get involved with one of those programs or places that can give me some help?
You mean all those services are free.
Yeah.
And so that's another, you should be exploring all of this because you can't beat the price. I mean, what's in it for the city and what's in it for most of the organizations is we're trying to create jobs, keep businesses in our town, and maybe get a little tax money for the government at the same time. And that itself is worth the journey.
Kevin and Marshall, one of the things, Kevin, you provided was just some of the numbers that we know so far about current and predicted federal layoffs due to program cuts. Thousands, tens of thousands of jobs that we're seeing that on the federal level might go away.
Yes, and I put that together for you yesterday based on 2 Forbes articles that I was reading. But that information has already changed because it's a day later.
Right.
But it's still an enormous, I mean, just the VA alone is 80,000 possible people being laid off as of June. I mean, if you put all of that together, it's rather impactful. There's a lot of people who are going to be affected by this. And we just felt that when we were talking that entrepreneurship might be the solution for a pretty good percentage of these folks.
Marshall, you're going to say?
I was going to kind of circle back to something else you just brought up a moment ago, like do people gravitate towards things they know?
Yeah.
And in 3 decades, I have found that to be somewhat true and not true. So I'll give you a prime example. During COVID, I had a client, South Florida, filled out my profile. In that profile, he noted 5 different times what he would not do. When we had our initial conversations, he reiterated, I have no interest whatsoever in health and fitness. That was the space he wanted to stay away from. Kept going through the profiling. Long story short, he bought all of Fort Lauderdale for a health and fitness concept. That was a large territory purchase. The point being, he didn't understand the dynamics and how that really kind of fit who he was and what his business model was that he had created. So it goes back to getting the resources, using them, and doing your due diligence, because I don't throw the dart at the dartboard. We take a much more scientific approach to this. The other side to, especially with government, which I'm very familiar with since I grew up in it, oftentimes when people lose their jobs, whether it be private sector or now the public sector, Florida is a state that they come to because they now have an opportunity to leave maybe where they are. This is the golden handcuffs are off. I've always wanted to live in Florida. No taxes, nice state, nice weather. Maybe it's a good place to start over. So that might be the opportunity for a lot of people that are maybe in transition, compliments of Doge. I don't know.
Right. What are some of the traits or qualities that I need to recognize in myself if I'm going to pursue owning a business,
Well,
buying
there's
a
certainly
business,
an
starting a
element,
business?
people say when you're your own boss, you can do whatever you want. If you don't want to work that day, you can do that. I haven't seen that in the real world. There's a lot of self-discipline that goes, and you have to lead by example. I mean, some people are lone wolves, they do everything by themselves, and maybe that's good for them to do that. Other people need other people to fulfill the processes that have to be done in the business that they've decided to do. So now you're managing. So, again, we talked before the program, some people are great marketers, but they can't count the money or manage it or even know what a spreadsheet looks like. And then there's other people who would do that all day and the phone never rings because they're not out selling. So you need that kind of cross-fertilization and discipline to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah. What are some other advice points you'd have for people who are thinking, I hadn't considered it before, maybe I will now?
Well, here's one to think of, and I think of it all the time. As soon as we hear the word franchise, people think of fast food and a huge investment going forward. But as he will tell you, it's not the case at all. That there's all levels of entree into the services and products and goods. Why don't you tell them about that a little bit?
Well, I think when you do think of franchising, you certainly think of McDonald's, you think of Chick-fil-A, which is kind of a hybrid franchising model. But out of 4,000 plus franchises, maybe half are food. But that means there's every other category, home services, business to business, pets, health and fitness, health and beauty. 52% of businesses, franchise businesses, are under $250,000 total investment. That includes working capital. Service businesses, under $100,000 a lot of times. And my oldest franchisee, who happens to be a personal friend of mine, we grew up together. I think he's in his 24th year of his service business, Fish Window Cleaning. They're the largest window cleaner in North Florida. 24 years later, and his initial investment was low. But so sometimes people think if I invest a little, I won't be able to live the lifestyle that I'm accustomed to. And that's a huge misnomer.
Well, and that certainly is the conception that I probably had was, I'm going to have a whole bunch in savings, or I'm going to have big loans in order to even get started. Not necessarily the case?
Typically with franchising, because banks have a tendency to want to get paid back. It's kind of a crazy idea.
Right.
It's catching on.
It's catching on. But I work with a lot of lenders that are very franchise-centric. They like that idea because they can replicate, look at the model, they can look at the success of the model. So historically, you need about 25 or 30% of your money as your seed, and then you can leverage the remaining part either through a conventional loan, a home equity line, an SBA loan. 85% of the people that I have worked with for the last 8 or 9 years are using part of their 401k as seed money, and there are ways that you can do that without paying any penalties whatsoever to invest in your business. So there are a lot of different ways to invest, but I have never had anyone in 3 decades walk up and write a check for their business out of their pocket. The smart ones that I've dealt with, the Harvard MBAs, the Stanford MBAs, the Wharton MBAs, always say the same thing. Why should I use my money when I can use somebody else's?
Yeah. I'm gravitating back to what you mentioned earlier about the risk. You're saying, hey, you're risk averse. You need to take calculated risks. So what's the math? It's not really numbers necessarily, but what's the math that I need to do in my mind to decide whether or not I want to pursue?
That's a fairly general question, but I think I can answer it. The word entrepreneur in French in English means risk taker, but it's a calculated risk. You can't just look at risk taker and say, I'm all in, roll the dice, right? My advice is to seek help. There's a lot more help out there to help you get into business than many people think. And when you do, listen to them. They've been there. He's worked with thousands of businesses doing what he's done in franchise help. I've worked with thousands as well. And there's other organizations be more than happy to help you with the expertise that they have to get to the right place at the right time with the right business.
Yeah. Marshall?
To add to that, the one thing that I try to get across is most of the clients that I work with now are referred to me from former clients or from outplacement firms that I work with. I'm doing a workshop on Thursday with an outplacement firm. But I tell everyone the same thing. Don't come to me looking for a sales pitch. There's no shortage of other consultants in my space that will be happy to give you that. But if someone like Kevin or Kent refers somebody to me, what I owe to their referral is honesty and integrity. And if you survive as a consultant in any space for more than 6 months, you're playing the long game because it's a tough place to be. And for 30 years, I've held that same mantra. I held it with my other 2 companies. Just treat people the way I want to be treated.
Yeah. So people who are considering this now, is there a certain timeline that hey, if I've got 8 months because I've got some severance or something, is that enough time to generate these ideas, go through the process of franchising or create my own business?
You have to have a plan. And the best thing to do is find someone who has helped people with a lot of plans before or written their own or teach it and talk to them first. And they'll help you with the timelines.
I think I'm not a big Tony Robbins fan, but there's one thing that he said years ago that's always stood out in my mind. There's 2 emotions that drive every decision that Kent, Kevin, Marshall, Susie will ever make: pain or pleasure. When I lost my job 41 years ago, totally out of the blue along with everyone else, there was a lot of pain associated with that, especially when I couldn't find another job, which then switched me to going the entrepreneurial route. So I think that you have to have that conversation with yourself emotionally, especially when you lose a job. You have that circle you got to go through. For me, I got back to anger. That was my driver. The next time I get fired, I'll fire myself. And I think for people that are going through transition, if you have that conversation with your family or with yourself or whatever, and you come around full circle and think, you know what do I have to lose by exploring that option, entrepreneurialism? And boy, I am risk averse. Maybe franchising, having that back room for me in the support systems, maybe that's a good place to start. What is it going to cost you not to look?
Yeah. I'm thinking about this. We have such a big military community here in Northeast Florida, right? And I was chatting with these gentlemen earlier that a friend who had served in the Navy and then, okay, what's my next career? And it turned out to be a franchise opportunity. What are some of the things, whether it's veterans or whether it's folks who have done this public service, what are some of the skills that they're going to be able to say, oh yeah, that will translate, I should look into being an entrepreneur, a franchise owner?
Well, 1 out of 7 franchises are owned by a veteran. So veterans make great franchise owners because they're used to following a system. Oftentimes they're risk adverse, but they're good at implementing a plan of action. And that goes across the board with anyone. If you're good at implementing a plan of action, then you probably have a good chance at being successful in the right franchise system. If you want to be a creator, a Steve Jobs, a Bill Gates, franchising is absolutely not for you, because those are the true entrepreneurs. But most franchise owners, they are good at replicating what someone else has done, and they're going to put their fingerprint on it.
Yeah.
So it'll look like them. But military, I've worked with academy graduates, I've worked with enlisted, I grew up in the military.
There are other professions as well. Nurses make great entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
They have to manage a process all day, every day. And so do former teachers. They're extremely entrepreneurial and are good leaders and good followers of processes.
That's fascinating. No, I had not heard that on teachers and nurses. As we wrap up today, what would you say next steps would be for folks? Just give them a shot of encouragement, because I can tell that you both are encouragers, you're optimists. What's the word to somebody watching or listening today?
We've lived through this. I mean, this is probably my 3rd or 4th economic cycle that I've lived all the way through, one way or the other. Whoever gets laid off, they're going to be fine, but seek help.
Okay. Marshall?
Yeah. Between 9/11, COVID being the last one, you know, Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall. There's no glue. We're never going to survive this. We come back bigger and stronger. There's nothing worse than being let go, especially when you don't expect it.
Yeah.
But there is light at the end of the tunnel. And just have that faith. And like, I'll use myself as an example. When it happened to me, I thought my life was over. It was a gift from God because it completely changed my paradigm. And so you'll be fine, you'll be successful. But like Kevin suggested, there are resources out there. Take advantage of them.
Yeah, those are good words. That's good encouragement. I appreciate it. Marshall Reddy and Kevin Monahan, our guests today. Thank you so much. I appreciate the time and diving into the topic with
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us on This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition. I would just encourage you, like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. New episodes drop out every Thursday at 9 a.m. We'll see you again.